Hi, everybody, and welcome back to week one. We're going to review the reading in this. I just finished the syllabus video, so hopefully I've put that hopefully in two places, one in week one and also in the syllabus overview. So I broke them out just so you could see the one without having to go through the other. In week one, we learned about the four main elements of diffusion. And innovation is communicated through certain channels. Oops, I forgot to switch over. Hold on. Innovation is communicated through certain channels over time amongst members of a social system. So hopefully we got this message through the reading. There are elements of how a diffusion takes place. So we have an actual innovation or an invention of some sort. It has to be communicated. It takes time, and it is communicated into the members of a social system. So we talked a little bit in the syllabus video about what a social system means. So it might be, members of a family. It might be members of a community or a neighborhood. It might be people in an organization or people within a department within an organization. But all of those are members of a social system. And you can think about some of the things that you've been asked to do differently in a lot of those different organizations, and how it takes time for you to accept and to kind of move forward with this new idea, and that it's important that that you respect and appreciate the person who is introducing the innovation to you. That's going to become a really key part of what we learn about, is the influence of different individuals on whether or not a diffusion actually takes place. So the Earth rewired for diffusion in 2018, so this was many years ago. 4 billion internet users worldwide, 60 trillion emails sent worldwide this year, 1.9 billion websites. So obviously those things have, dramatically changed in the last 3 years, especially with the COVID years, because so many of us were isolated during that time. We did so much more online, so much more e-commerce took place online because we didn't have any choice, right? We weren't allowed to go out. So we saw a lot of dramatic change over those years, just because, there was no other option. So the characteristics of innovation, which we learn about in this chapter, are the relative advantage. So the degree to which an innovation is perceived as better than the idea it supersedes. So this is a really important aspect of how an innovation is viewed. And it's not necessarily viewed with a relative advantage by everyone who's looking at the innovation. This is one of the key aspects from when we look at Utterback, is there are maybe certain audiences or people who view the new innovation as having a relative advantage, and others, maybe in a different social system or in the same social system, but that use the previous product more readily, don't see it as having a relative advantage. Here we can think about things like the camera, right? The digital camera. The relative advantage for the digital camera was that, you could see the pictures right away. You didn't have to print out all the pictures that, didn't work out. You could delete them easily. But at the time, the quality of the product was less than, say, what you would have had in a 35 millimeter film. So some people saw advantages, other people didn't. And that's part of how innovations take place. There is an audience that believes in them, that continues to fuel it, while the other audience is, kind of looking the other way and saying, no, this isn't better for me. Compatibility, the degree to which an innovation is perceived as being consistent with the existing values, past experiences, and needs of potential adopters. Again, compatibility is different from one group or one person to the next. So where some people may find an innovation very compatible with the way that they do things. Other people will not. I'll give you an example. So a friend of mine is the same age as I am. We have very similar experiences. Our children went to the same school, and we grew up. They grew up. We lived very close to each other. One of us, that would be me, shops online constantly. The idea of going into a store is absolutely out of the question. It is the very last thing I'm going to do. My friend goes to the store all the time for everything. Everything that she buys in a brick and mortar store. And the idea of compatibility, so the compatibility of ordering things online works for me because I consider myself super busy, right? Getting a PhD, working, teaching class. I have 6 children, and the convenience of ordering online is great for me. On the other hand, my friend, it is not compatible at all. She wants to touch something and look at it and compare it to the other things, and the limitations of ordering online are numbing to her. So you can see that the compatibility is different between different individuals. Complexity is the degree to which an innovation is perceived as difficult to understand and use. Again, we go back to our example, right? Ordering online, you've got to set up an account. You've got to learn how to use the website. You've got to, add in your credit card, which is, a trust issue in some cases. And to my friend, this is way too complicated. I can just go to the store and use my credit card and pick out what I need, and I have it immediately. It's in my cart, it's in my car, it's in my house. So the complexity also has to work for the individual that is adopting the innovation. Trialability, the degree to which an innovation may be experimented with on a limited basis. So being able to try something out, like driving a car before you buy it, maybe going to a furniture store and sitting on a couch. A lot of times when you buy a mattress, you go to a store and you lay on the mattress and you make sure that it's comfortable for you, right? So the ability to try something helps us to move forward in implementing the innovation. And observability, the degree to which the results of an innovation are visible to others. This becomes an important aspect as we're doing the reading, because observability is not just I see anyone using it. Observability, when we talk about diffusion, it's important to see the right person using it, someone I respect, someone who I think thinks through things, and that their opinion is valuable to me. So observability begins to have a different element, a different level of importance as we look at how innovations diffuse. The communication channels, so is the means by which messages get from one individual to another. So mass media channels, so radio and TV and newspapers, the internet, webcasts, YouTube. Interpersonal, face-to-face, phone, email, instant messaging. And then hybrid, looking at things like social media. How do we communicate our new innovations, the things that we're looking at through all of these channels. So social media, we now have things called influencers that try things out for us, and if we follow them and we respect them, we may very well adopt something that they recommend. Interpersonal, this is really more face-to-face with our neighbors, our family, etc., our boss maybe, things where we're able to understand what the benefits are of this innovation through someone who is either recommending it or using it or something like that. Mass media, we know, is the least effective in implementing innovation. It is really just about awareness, understanding that this is available to us and potentially that we should think about using it. Communication channels, a little bit more about it. There are different elements of our social system and how they influence us. So homophily is the degree to which two or more individuals who interact are similar in certain attributes, beliefs, education, social status, etc. It means that this is someone that is very similar to us in some way. It doesn't necessarily have to be race or gender or something like that. It can be something where we belong to the same church or school district or organization, etc. And our beliefs are similar in some way. So a good example of this is, again, the extension system, which we'll learn about in one of the case studies. This is something the ag schools put together, and there is a class in Michigan that's put on by the Michigan State Extension. It's called the Master Gardener class. So the Master Gardener class it's a single, like, college level class where you learn about soil and water and fertilizing and things like that. And the people who come to the Master Gardener class, they come from all areas of Michigan. They come from different social and status areas. They come from different levels of education and belief. They're different races. But they all have in common a desire to understand and learn more about gardening. And so this creates this homophilous group. And if a master gardener tells me something, I am prone to believe it or to look into it more myself rather than just like an ordinary person who likes gardening. Because I understand that they've gone through this process. They've decided that education in this space is important. They want research-based understanding. And so we have this like bond, basically, this respect for one another because we've both attended this class and we've learned the same amount of information. Heterophilous or heterophily is the opposite. So it is when people are very different. So like, the example with the master gardener, someone who is a master gardener versus someone who's not. Those are heterophilous. That would be a heterophilous relationship for me. And it is someplace where when these groups of people get together where they do not have things in common, it is difficult for innovations to diffuse because we have different ways of thinking about things and understanding, maybe different languages, things like that, where we don't even understand what the other person is saying. And so homophilous helps us to diffuse innovations. Heterophilous is more challenging. More effective communication occurs when two or more people are homophilous. One of the most distinctive problems in the diffusion of information is that participants are quite heterophilous. So it really is something that you need to think about. And it's not to say that this is something that is right or good. It just is what it is. And so when we're dealing with a heterophilous community of people, we need to work harder on communication and understanding and, one-to-one kind of communication in order to get a diffusion or to get an innovation to diffuse. So time, the innovation decision process by which an individual passes from first knowledge of an innovation through its adoption or rejection. The innovativeness of the individual or other unit of adoption compared to other members of the social system. And the innovation's rate of adoption in a system usually measured as the number of members of the system that adopt the innovation in a given time period. So time is really one of those things that we need to just allow enough of it. There is a specific process by which we go through the understanding of an innovation, the adoption, the use, and then kind of the implementation of it. So we are going to learn about this decision process. We don't, generally speaking, most people do not go from there's the newest thing, an iPhone, I've got it and I'm using it today, right? It takes time for us to understand and implement new innovations. The innovativeness of the individual is also a key factor because some people are very innovative. They are the innovators. They are the first people to try things out. They are the ones who are the standing in line for the newest innovation. And they're a very small minority in the overall scheme of people that are going to adopt an innovation, and we'll learn about that, very specifically. What are those areas of adoption? What are those people called? And innovators are the very first ones. So that level of innovativeness is extremely high, where laggards, and we'll learn about that too, have a very low level of innovativeness. They are very risk averse and they don't like new things. So it's important that, oops, I switched, yeah. That we take into consideration where people are on the innovativeness curve. And then the innovation's rate of adoption, it depends on what we've got. It depends on where people are in the process, depends on how innovative the organization or social system is. And you'll find that organizations like Ford, which again are specific phase organizations, according to James Utterback, it's going to take time for them to adopt something new. And we need to give them time because otherwise it's just not going to happen. So the innovation decision process, we begin with knowledge. So we are aware that something's new, a new idea is coming out. We move to persuasion. Should we try this out? Who's saying that we should? We make a decision. Yes, we're going to implement. We implement it, and then reinvention takes place where the innovation is changed a little bit in order for us to accept it. So perhaps, trying to think, perhaps something goes in and we realize, okay, this isn't going to work for this group because this, starts at a certain time and the people don't even get here till after that. So we've got to adjust when the lights turn on or something like that. So reinvention means we're going to take that innovation and we're going to change it a little bit to work within the social system. And then confirmation, which means, yes, we like it, we're working with it, and it now becomes something that we don't even think about anymore. It just becomes part of our habit, which is important. We need to get it into the system so that it becomes a habit. So time, the innovativeness is the degree to which an individual or other unit adopts new ideas earlier than other members of the system. So we talked about innovators. Those are the people that are the first in line to get the new invention. Early adopters follow them directly. They have friends that are innovators, and they let the innovator influence them and persuade them to try something new. The early majority is where we get to that normal bell curve, right? We get to the middle of that curve and we get a huge spike in adoption and diffusion. The early majority relies significantly on the early adopters. Early adopters are very well-respected people within the organization for whatever reason, and they are the ones that have a great deal of influence on that early majority. The late majority use the early majority as their test bed, and they see, well, they've got all these things going, and I can see it working now. I see a lot of people using these electric cars or robot vacuum cleaners or whatever it is. And they seem to be having good results, and the late majority starts to adopt. Laggards are people who won't really adopt until there is no other choice. So they're not really using any majority. They are well aware that the innovation is there. They don't like it. They don't want it. Their habits are very restrictive and keep them from moving forward. But at some point, of course, there's no other way to go but the innovation. And so they must trade in their flip phone for, a smartphone or something like that. So those are the stages. This also comes out of Everett Rogers. So the rate of adoption, as you're looking at time, this is where those different innovation types have their influence. So in the very beginning here, these are your innovators that are taking, on the innovation. Now we're getting to early adopters are right in here, and we're starting to see more diffusion. This is where we have our early majority. And then, this is our bell curve right here. This is our late majority. And then as we get here, we start to taper off quite a bit because we get to our laggards. Like everybody who's going to adopt has adopted. But you can see it takes time. And this is the S curve that we'll talk about throughout this course. The numbers down here depend on basically the relative advantage of this, innovation and the kind of the success of the early adopters and the early majority. So the higher the success rate, the more this starts to look like an R. So you'll see in our book that there's a couple of curves, and it depends on how quickly something diffuses, what the opportunity and advantage are. So this, you can see some of the modern technologies, and you see these are like the internet here. It says 1975. You see this is going to be more of an R, right? Here's an R versus an S. So the telephone here is an S. Electricity is kind of an S, because it's, but here we have the radio and television. These are R curves. You can see the shape of the curve is more of an R. And the automobile, again, more like an S. It took more time for the automobile to diffuse. So these are the different types of examples of different types of diffusion of modern technologies and how they diffused, whether they took the form of an S curve or an R curve where there was a rapid adoption. It just went straight up. A social system is defined as a set of interrelated units that are engaged in joint problem solving to accomplish a goal. Again, a social system, can be anything, family, neighborhoods, church groups, professional organizations. So an organization of engineers or of financial business people. It is just a group of people who have some sort of shared relationship, some sort of shared opinion or, experience. Opinion leadership is the degree to which an individual is able to influence other individuals' attitudes or behavior. Again, an opinion leadership is very key in the early adopter stage. This is an early adopter is someone who has a lot of leadership somehow within the organization, whether it is given to them by some sort of title or something they've just earned. But their opinion is important to a social system. And a change agent is an individual who influences clients' innovation decisions in a direction deemed desirable by a change agency. A change agent is not necessarily someone who is respected or desired at all. A lot of times this is someone who is extremely innovative. A company or an individual within the company has said this is a direction that we should go in, and it's the change agent's job to implement that. Not an easy job. As a technology person who worked for technology companies for decades, we are those change agents, those technology suppliers and such. And it is not an easy job to take on because a lot of times you are working against the grain. And they don't necessarily last long. So sometimes the change agent is brought in for a specified period of time to kind of jumpstart, an innovation or a diffusion, and then they have to go because they're not necessarily someone who's going to have the correct level of influence to get the diffusion through the system. Social system types of innovation decisions, they are optional, they are collective, or they are implemented by some sort of authority. So optional means we don't have to take it on. Collective means we've made a decision as a group, some sort of group that says we're all going to use this new thing. Or authority means someone has said to us, we're going to take this on and we have to do it. So that might be something at work. That might be something, to parents implement on children, some place where we didn't necessarily have a choice, but we're going to implement this. Consequences of innovation. So there are desirable and undesirable consequences of innovations. This is something that is important for us to understand and something that we learn a lot of in the, where am I? Oh, there we go. I'm just checking to see where we are in the slide deck. The consequences of innovation. So in the Everett Rogers book, we understand both desirable and undesirable consequences of innovation. This is a word that we use. It has like a bad connotation, a consequence, but it is actually just what happens when something takes place. This word was actually in my dissertation, the consequences of the innovation of software as a service. All the consequences in my dissertation were positive, but we use that word consequence to indicate that this is just something that naturally takes place, whether it is direct or indirect. So the person who actually took on the innovation, or perhaps the next generation, or those that were influenced by that direct impact of the innovation. And anticipated versus unanticipated. This is something that we will learn a great deal about in the Rogers reading, that there are a lot of unanticipated consequences of innovation. We put some invention in place to help someone with something, and we realized that we changed their life a lot, and that had a great deal of influence on the social system. So you will see that. So seldom are change agents able to predict an innovation's meaning, the subjective perceptions of the innovation by the clients. So you will notice that, again, this is about the fact that an innovation is meant for something, to change or improve something, but there's not necessarily an understanding of what the indirect influences and changes that will take place. And that's probably one of the issues that change agents had. They're there to get something done, and it's not about understanding what's unanticipated. Where the organization might have a good idea, if they look at something, what those unanticipated changes are, and that might be part of their resistance. So this is where we are going to stop this video and continue on in the next video.